Is Israel an apartheid or not?
Absolutely not. I mean, apartheid is basically the segregation of communities. Like an Arab would not be able to get on the same train with a very Orthodox Jew. That doesn't happen here. I mean, I'm Egyptian and I did all that and no one even asked anything.
Mr. Khaled Hassan, you are an Egyptian, British national security and foreign policy researcher, an expert in Islamic terrorism. First of all, I want to say to you, thank you so much for agreeing to give us an interview. The first question I want to start with, you describe yourself as an Egyptian, British, and Israeli at heart. That is a really big statement.
It is, yes, and it's a statement that I decided to include because I do believe that I'm Israeli at heart because I'm Middle Eastern. Israelis are Middle Eastern. Israelis believe in free speech. They believe in values that I fundamentally believe in. And that's why I feel very Israeli, actually. Even walking the streets of Tel Aviv, walking the streets of Jerusalem for the very first time ever, I feel like it's my place here. You know, I belong here. So yes.
You are Egyptian.
Yes.
You're born in Egypt. You are a Muslim. Did you grow up being exposed to Jewish hatred in Egypt?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, I want to correct one thing. I converted to Judaism and I started in 2016.
Oh.
Yes. And a lot of people don't know that about me because I don't make that very sort of clear in my bio because I don't think it needs to be that clear. I don't think it's very relevant to my actual views. But yes, absolutely. I did post about this before. I grew up basically being told that Jews are the ultimate evil. You know, the demonization of Jews was very much part of my culture growing up in Egypt. And I mean, it's very clear. I can give you examples. For instance, my dad owned a Fiat, but he would always say to me, I'd love to have a VW, Volkswagen.
Yeah.
It's Hitler's car. And the glorification of Hitler, Nazism, is everywhere. It's everywhere in Egyptian society.
But where does it come from? Where does this deep-rooted anti-Semitism within the Arab world come from?
Ultra-nationalism combined with Islamism. That's the problem. It's a religious ultra-nationalist movement that basically makes Israel and Jews the enemy.
And you just told us that you converted to Judaism.
Yes.
How was the reaction of your family and the wider community?
The comments I get on Twitter are quite representative of how the wider community reacts, which is obviously you're just a Mossad agent. They paid you to do this, which is because I actually paid to complete my conversion because you have to pay fees for books to learn. So so it's actually an expensive process in a way. But my family has always been moderate. My family has always been, in a way, quite secular, actually, in some form. Obviously, my mom is not happy. She'd rather have a Muslim son. But she ignores that side. She's always known that I used to go drinking. I used to, live a very Western life, even in Egypt, by the way, which is possible. It's not impossible. It's very possible.
I'm quite surprised because Egypt and Israel, they signed a peace treaty many decades ago. Yeah. So why we still have a problem with anti-Semitism?
It's a very interesting community generally because that agreement was to Egyptians a piece of paper, basically. You sign a piece of paper, and not every piece of paper that you sign means something to you. If you get internet service, you sign a piece of paper that says, "Oh, I'm getting this." It doesn't really have value to you. It doesn't really have meaning. You sign it, you forget it the next day. I think this is what Egyptians did. But not only that, Egyptian society has these aspects to it that make it really impossible to even reach out to Israelis, for Egyptians who even want to, which are extremely rare. They just can't. Egyptians cannot visit. If you visit, you're going to be scrutinized, questioned by security. You're never going to have a job in any respectful organization because that means you are potentially a spy. So there are serious issues in society that just make it almost nearly impossible to actually have this people-to-people dialogue. And when you don't have that, you just have peace on a piece. You have peace on a piece of paper, really. So that's the challenge we have here. It's not actual warm peace.
Now I want to move on to the report you worked on with a number of lawyers and data scientists.
My background is in counterterrorism, basically national security and foreign policy. I've been doing that for about 14 years or even longer. And because of my background, because of my Arabic, I was approached by a friend who knew Trevor Saracen, who's the lawyer who leads the report and who wrote the report. And basically they asked me if I wanted to volunteer my experience and my time to the report. So I did. And my part was investigating BBC Arabic, which is very, very problematic. My view is that it's very somewhat pro-Hamas, because basically it excuses Hamas's massacres. It undermines the seriousness of the crimes committed by Hamas. And that makes it somewhat pro-Hamas, really. And the reporters and the people they interview are horrifically anti-Semitic, blatantly pro-Hamas. So that's why it's really challenging.
So your report alleged that the BBC breached its editorial guidelines more than 1,500 times. I mean, that is quite a lot. What kind of breaches are we talking about?
So the breaches are, BBC has guidelines that are meant to guide the BBC on how to do things professionally and also impartially. So that's one of the key words here. And the guidelines are, for instance, when it comes to people who are affiliated with Hamas, somebody who's presented in BBC Arabic articles as, an innocent victim of Israeli oppression, of Israeli brutality. But when you actually investigate who this person is, you're going to find out that many, many of them are officially hired by Hamas. They are actual officials hired by Hamas. Or they're awfully anti-Semitic, or they're awfully involved in Hamas's activity. And that is here a serious breach, which basically means that they're not reporting on who this person actually is because they're obviously biased.
So, when it comes to the death toll in Gaza, does the BBC distinguish between, the death of Hamas fighters from civilian? I mean, how does it work? How is the mechanism?
No, it doesn't. Our research has shown that BBC English and BBC Arabic both are they very easily accept the information provided by the Gaza Health of Ministry, which is Hamas controlled. We've had this conversation. A lot of people have had this conversation with them publicly and saying you need to basically show that this is Hamas controlled. The most they do sometimes is say Hamas controlled Ministry of Health. But it's not enough, because it still accepts the numbers. It still accepts the facts that are, well, not facts, the narrative that is presented by Hamas. And that's not factual. These are not facts. And these need to be questioned.
This morning as I was coming to work, I read somewhere that Jeremy Bowen,
yes,
one of the BBC stars, and it was in regard to the Al-Shifa hospital. I mean, he acknowledged the story wasn't 100% correct or verified, but he said, I don't feel any regret.
That is what I find fascinating.
Yeah.
If I, as a professional, if I make a mistake, and this mistake could lead to the increase of anti-Semitism, for instance, because I remember that occasion very vividly, when they reported on this, and it was all over the news. The hospital is bombed, Israelis. And you could see the anti-Semitic attacks that we received in the Jewish community in Britain, that every Jew receives, because you're baby killers now. That's what they say to you. You've killed babies. You've killed innocent people in the hospital. And the fact that we are telling him this, we're telling him you're misreporting, your inaccurate reporting is basically affecting us, our lives, our security. And he says he has no regrets. This tells you all that you need to know, really.
So, Mr. Khaled, how do you explain this anti-Israel culture within the BBC?
It's, unfortunately, the BBC takes a narrative that is focused on anti-racism, is focused on social equality, which are amazing things when you actually, look at these concepts superficially, I suppose. But when you look at what the BBC actually does, they're not really anti-racist when it comes to Jews. They're not really interested in equality when it comes to Jews, because they don't present Jewish voices. They don't present Zionist voices accurately. And that's the challenge. It has become the narrative that if you're on the right side of history, that's the BBC basically, the Western narrative, then you should be anti-Israel. Or at least you shouldn't support Israel.
And this anti-Israel narrative, is it, prominent in all BBC platform, or is it, compare the Arabic versus the English BBC. Are they similar?
Yes, they are similar, but BBC Arabic goes way beyond the anti-Israel narrative. BBC Arabic is pretty much pro-Hamas in many ways. The reporters who work for them, the people they interview, not only do most of them not recognize Israel's right to exist, but they have made horrifically anti-Semitic statements, and they have made pro-Hamas statements.
On September the 9th, you wrote on Twitter, or X now, BBC Arabic is the British Al Jazeera, paid by the British government to promote pro-Hamas content. This is a very strong statement. How did you come to this conclusion?
Let's look at the facts. BBC Arabic does not refer to Hamas as a terrorist organization. Al Jazeera does not refer to Hamas as a terrorist organization. BBC Arabic interviews the same kind of people that Al Jazeera interviews. Egyptians, Jordanians, Palestinians who are anti-Semitic, pro-Hamas, many of them. And BBC Arabic excludes Arab Israelis. They don't interview Arab Israelis. They don't interview someone like me who is a Zionist, someone like me who believes that Israel has the right to exist. Al Jazeera does not interview people like me, does not interview Zionists, does not. They give you, Al Jazeera would give you maybe 1% of the coverage. So that is exactly the same situation with BBC Arabic. So what is different between BBC Arabic and Al Jazeera?
Then I will move on to another tweet in where you said the BBC is farming Jew hatred and must be held accountable. I mean, now you're saying that the BBC is basically anti-Semite.
Farming Jew hatred for me is through inaccurate information presented to the speakers. So when you present a narrative that Israel is bad, then we end up getting accusations that we're baby killers. We're happy to see Palestinians die. And that's how the BBC is doing it. So although the BBC, English especially, is not engaging in blatant anti-Semitism, like it's not saying, oh, Jews are bad, it's the misinformation they provide on Jewish communities, the misinformation they provide on Israel, means that they actually have a direct impact in increasing anti-Semitism. And that's why they're farming Jew hatred, in my view, because they have been doing this for so many years. Inaccurate reporting, and again, the representation of Israel as this horrific entity. That is how you promote an anti-Semitic narrative, although you're not engaging directly in actually saying Jews are bad,
I mean, the BBC is funded by the British people. Why the British people and British government allowing this to continue?
I think it's the lack of political will. The British government, especially now under Keir Starmer, does not really want to do much. They do not really want to confront an Islamist narrative that is increasing in the UK. It's very much the same reason a man who belongs to Hizb al-Tahrir called for jihad in the heart of London and during the protest, and the police did not arrest him. He quite literally said jihad, jihad, jihad. No one arrested him. No one did anything. He's a free man now.
The report, some of the findings are just like shocking. And one of them is that a number of BBC journalists are openly pro-Hamas supporter. And I'm going to read a tweet to you. And I mean, because I have seen this tweet, a lot of media been talking about it. And allegedly this comes from someone who worked for the BBC. Sir Hitler, rise. There are few people that need to be burned. I mean, is it true? I mean, do we really have journalists who work for the BBC who are clearly anti-Semite and openly support Hamas?
100%, especially BBC Arabic. The overwhelming... So anti-Semitism is a complicated concept for many to understand. If you deny Israel the right to exist, you're basically saying that half of the world's Jewry should not live in Israel. They should basically die. They should be basically ethnically cleansed. So BBC Arabic really is inherently anti-Semitic in its current format because they don't even interview people who acknowledge that Israel has the right to exist. That's the challenge. So it is, we've had many cases like this where people make these very blatant, and I mean, I know an Egyptian BBC reporter who's actually sacked by the BBC after we exposed her because she said that basically Israel is lying about rape, allegations of rape. No one has been raped, no one has been beheaded, blah, 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 blah. And that is basically undermining, well, suggesting that we are, again, baby killers and that we have no right to defend ourselves and that we're making it all up, that we're actually Israel is actually shooting Israelis and they killed Israelis who were attending the Nova Festival, which is blatant anti-Semitism.
And these are people who are employed by the BBC.
Absolutely.
Your voice is absent from Arab media and international media.
What I like to focus on is basically influencing policy. But the problem is there is no interest in the information I have to offer. There is no interest in the experience that I have to offer in Arab media. They want to basically promote one narrative, which is Israel is bad, Palestinians are victims. There are Palestinian victims, we're not denying this. I believe, children in Gaza, if you're born, in 2023, a child who's born in 2023 and then is thrown into war, that is, a very helpless child. That is a victim, 100%. And we need to highlight this, absolutely, a victim of war that was started by Hamas. But that's the main concept. In Western media, they don't show this. And in Arabic media, they obviously take a very anti-Semitic, very anti-Israel approach.
And your voice, is it unique, or do we have like more Arabs coming out and speaking about, about Israel, speaking about peace, coexistence?
I think my voice is unfortunately still unique. And I'm saying unfortunately because it's still very rare for people who grew up with my background to come to love Israel and basically promote for Israel to exist and defend itself. So it's still unique, but I think there is an increase, and that's one positive side.
Is it unique because of fear, or is it unique because these people still have deep-rooted anti-Semitic, ideas and thought?
It's both. It's a combination of both, because people are scared of speaking out, and also because overwhelmingly, a society like where I come from, Egypt, is overwhelmingly and really horrifically anti-Semitic.
So tell me, what happened to those like you who speak out and who want to change the narrative or correct the narrative?
Once you speak out, you know that basically your life will never be the same again. You will not be able to visit a country like Yemen. You'll not be able to visit a country like Lebanon. You'll not be able to visit a country even like Egypt, because it's very unsafe for you. And because you're always seen as a suspect. That's the problem. Once you begin to even say Israel has the right to exist, you're a Mossad agent, you're a spy, and that complicates things. So it's a decision that has to be made. You can either be quiet and pretend that, this is not your fight, or engage in this fight and promote what is actually factual evidence when it comes to Israel.
What kind of threat have you received, or your family, loved one? Are we talking about like just verbal threat or physical threat?
I mean, I receive threats all the time from mostly Egyptians, actually, because they believe that I betrayed them somehow. So, I mean, I received threats. Somebody said to me the other day in Egyptian, we will rape your mom's dead body, which was unbelievable. Like, to somebody actually say this, it's... And then I received threats that I will be beheaded. That happens all the time. And I received threats actually from, unfortunately, extremist Muslims in the UK. And even, non-Muslims sometimes, they engage in that kind of rhetoric. It doesn't faze me. It doesn't really affect, how I approach things. But obviously it is a threat. So I have to take some serious security measures in most places, really.
Thank you so much for giving us an interview. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.